Hi there, Deborah Roth here, and here in a very different location than where you usually see me. There's actually a very cool, let's see if I can tip my camera up, beautiful picture I'm at my mom's of sunflowers in this space, in this wonderful space that she lives up in Mystic, Connecticut. I come up for my monthly visit. So a couple different things today. My background, my major boo-boo, don't ask. I will tell you, but I'm not going to tell you more because it's so ridiculous. Doing laundry, and I turned around fast and clipped my eye with lots of blood and a bruise. I think there's even a black eye starting on the edge of a door. So I don't know, maybe it feels particularly apropos, number one, because it's Mercury retrograde and we can run into very interesting things, more around communication and travel and that kind of thing. But it can be a little wonky time. And also because we are in the Scorpio season, which is about life and death and transformation, which also kind of undergirds all of the not all, but many of the goddesses that I do this time of year as part of my Inner Goddess Team, Embodying Your Inner Goddess Team video series. Last month was Mebayan from the Philippines, who was a very revered goddess of the underworld. And this will be the last one that I do today. This is a different one, another one that I hadn't heard of, Yewa. And she is a Yoruban from Africa, particularly from the Dahomey, different things that I read from the Dahomey tribe, but also in present-day Nigeria. There's actually a river named after her. One of the tribes is actually called the Yewa tribe. So she's pretty revered. And her name is actually a compilation of the two words in whatever the language is, that mean, let me see if I can find it. Anyway, so her name, it was Yeye and Yewa, and that in fact is one, oh, here we go. Yeye, which means mother, and Awa, which means our. So it literally means our mother. So that's how deep and revered she was. And I mean, those of us modern folks and I've talked about this in my Samhain, my Halloween short little video that I did, and I teach about it all this time of year. Those of us in the Western modern civilizations can get freaked out by this conversation of death and the underworld, and this time of year being the time when it's considered that the veil is the thinnest between the worlds of the living and the dead, when in cultures all over the world, literally so many cultures around the world, and again, you can review other things that I've done about this time of year. It's a very sacred time, and in the video that I did on Samhain on October 31st, just reminding people in the midst of our trick-or-treating and everything else that accompanies that, the candy, the costumes, everything else, that there is this very deep, really sacred celebration of our ancestors, of bringing back their memories and celebrating with them, creating a place at the table, visiting them in cemeteries. So this goddess of the Yoruban people, and then they brought her with them, as many of their Orishas, or their goddesses, were brought with them in the slave trade, when they and these in particular settling in South and Central America. These Orishas, these goddesses, Yewa. And interestingly, when she was still in Africa, when she was being worshipped in Africa, she was a goddess of the water, of fertility, of mothers, a protector, a patron of mothers. And somewhere in the transition from not just the slave trade, but just she evolved into this goddess who watched over cemeteries and grave sites, protected and made sure that grave sites were treated with reverence, and then helped departed souls in their transition to the underworld or to the afterlife, depending on the culture, wherever you were. And when she, along with her sisters and brother Orishas, made their way to the Western Hemisphere from Africa, they evolved into the religion of Santeria. And I found all kinds of different things. There's so much. I was surprised, frankly, that there was a lot about her, but kind of very different. She shows up in a lot of different myths in Cuba, in Brazil. So I'm going to kind of stick to one and give you an idea of her background and tell you why she was so revered. I think I've given you some indication of that. She was considered, by the time she then evolved into this symbol, this energy of purity and innocence. In one of the versions of her myth, she is the daughter of one of the head Orishas. She is hold on a sec, let me make sure I have that one right, of Obatala. And he was responsible for creating mankind, one of the many who created mankind. Hey, Colleen. He was a god of purity. I'll tell you a little bit about that version of the myth in a minute. So there's all kinds of ways that she has relevance for us today. I'm feeling the need for that kind of reverences in my poor battered boo-boo and some of the other things I've talked about. But she in her original connection, and that's probably at the very end, I often love to just sing a chant, a goddess chant, and I think rather than celebrating, as I did last month and other months, where we've been really highlighting these goddesses of the underworld, these goddesses, and in this case Orishas, who remind us that this is not a scary horror story we're talking about. When we honor these goddesses, this is a time when we revere that passage and the sacredness of the passage from life to death. And so she is one of three goddesses actually in the Yoruban and then Santerian tradition that guarded graveyards. Oya, which if you go to my YouTube channel, I've talked about Oya. She's another powerful Orisha. And then Obba, which I didn't know much about. She was actually the goddess of mountains and cemeteries. And between the three of them, they protect the secrets of the dead from the living, and they together guide our deceased loved ones into the afterlife. So it's important for them. And I said this about Mebayan last month when we were talking about that Filipino goddess. Is that it is important to keep the worlds of the living and the dead separate. And that's part of the job that they do too. So some of her, let's see, I'm going to tell you, she's got kind of amazing, really interesting mythology, and I'm only going to touch on some of it. See if there's another. Okay, so I think I've hit all of the basic general stuff about her. So her origin story, Yewa's origin story, is kind of it is a sad one. Almost regardless of what version you listen to. She, like many of the, she's also known as Yewa, Yewa, which kind of sounds like what she came from. In one of the versions, she's just this gorgeous. She's a beautiful young woman. She's still a virgin and very naive, and she's also very beautiful, and her chastity is invokes the curiosity of both men and of the gods, of the Orishas. And one in particular, Shango, who has a reputation as being a womanizer, seduces her. She's very flattered, and then abandons her when she becomes pregnant. And so she is completely destroyed, humiliated, and she thinks, of course, that she's fallen in love with him. She's scared, she's desperate, and in that state, another Orisha, the Orisha of the desert, Baromu, he's also a guardian of the cemetery. Gives you an idea of how important these indigenous and these ancient cultures really revered this time, this passage, and he of Cemeterian bones, this Boromu, he offers to help her and gives her, and she gladly accepts the help, gives her an herbal mix, which then aborts her child, and she buries the fetus under a tree. And in the meantime, she's completely devastated and traumatized, and she decides to exile herself to a cemetery. In the meantime, Boromu goes to one of the head Orishas, gods, and tells him what has happened, and they apparently dig up this child, and Olukun breathes life back into the child, and the child is raised up. And apparently in that version of it, Yewa doesn't even know that her child has come back to life. So in the other version, she marries Boromo. And so that makes you question. There's a lot of kind of many of the issues that women face today, not knowing whether this Orisha offered to help her in her despair by giving her the herbs to abort her child because he honestly, truly wanted to support her, or whether he wanted her for himself. So all this is kind of a little bit vague in these various stories. And it seems that, but it still ends up being kind of a metaphor for what happened in the transition from Yewa's story when she was still in Africa and part of the Yoruban culture, and was transported through the slave trade to the Western Hemisphere. Lots of metaphors in there. So but remember, she was also considered a goddess of fertility. So how does that fit in with the fact that she made the decision to abort this child? Now, the other version of the myth, or one of the other, I should say, that I kind of liked a little bit better, still features Shango as the bad guy. She is the daughter of Abattola, who is another powerful Orisha. And she decides to follow in his footsteps. And remember, I mentioned him before, that he's a god of purity, and she wants to also keep her chastity vow and remain a virgin forever. And so she abandons the mortal world and goes to live in her father's crystal palace. Shango hears about this beautiful girl. This is the second version of the myth. That's living, isolated, and he sneaks into the garden where she often walks and seduces her. And in this one, attempts to seduce her, I should say, and she immediately falls in love with him. So at least there's a little love going on here, rather than this really awful part from the first version of the myth. But she's experiencing emotions that she's never felt before. Like love and lust and passion. And she's mortified at herself and confused and ashamed. And she runs away back to her father, tells her father what's happened. And he reprimands her for this, because she's supposed to be living this chaste life. But because he loves his daughter, he then says to her, I understand your commitment to chastity and to being your own woman. Remember, and I've talked about this before, the ancient definition of virgin is woman who is one unto herself, which I love. Doesn't mean that necessarily that she's celibate, but that she chooses who she wants to be with. That's a story for another time. But that certainly comes in here. She is making her own choices. So in this version, she is finally able to keep her vow without any distractions, because her father then sends her to the realm of the dead, where she's appointed the guardian of cemeteries. And that for her is a happier way and allows her to maintain her vow. Because no one, not even Shango in all of his womanizing ways, dares to enter this realm. So I think and part of what happens, all of these metaphors, when in the first version where she accepts Boromu's help and takes the herb that aborts her child, she gives up that original power that she held for honoring children and fertility. So once she settled there, she actually, once she settled in the realm of the dead, she takes on all these other roles. And apparently, in terms of, taking care of the recently departed souls, protecting their grave sites, making sure that their souls safely reach the afterlife. Sometimes, apparently, she appears as an owl, so that she can perform her duties without humans seeing her. And there are many followers of her in the Santerian tradition, and they are really, I don't know what the word is, admonished, I guess, to be very respectful about people who are chaste, and to who have made the decision not to to have a vow of chastity, and to be respectful around anyone, to not make fun of the dead, or to try and desecrate their remains in any way, because she can be one of those, as many of the goddesses of the dead are. She can be pretty brutal in her lessons, the way that she reminds people to respect her and respect what their realms are. Now, given all that, I've said that she's beautiful. She's, and I do have pictures of her that I found, paintings. This is one. She is always depicted as a young, beautiful woman with reds and pinks, dresses of reds and pinks. Here's another version. And holding a death rattle, a crown made of cowrie shells. Sometimes she can, as I said, take on the appearance of an owl. Now, she was then, as many of these ancient, both Christian, both early pre-Christian, but also African goddesses and orishas this happened to them. She's syncretized, meaning she's kind of taken over by the Catholic Church in particular, and Christians. And she is made a saint, and I have a whole thing. I'll put it in the YouTube description. And she's most often represented in the Catholic Church as any number of the Black Madonnas, which are depictions of the Virgin Mary. And she has dark skin and other things that are not necessarily so typical of Christian saints. So I think it's important. One of the things that I think is so important in looking at one of these representations of the divine feminine is that she represents dark feminine energy. Dark does not mean bad, as we have come, and the patriarchy has done a really good job of that. It just means deep. It means womb-like. And as we know, the womb is a sacred place. But it's necessary. This dark feminine energy is necessary for the cycle of life and death. So, given all that, I thought because I've shared my favorite ancestor chant many times when I do different goddesses of the underworld, which I always do this time of year over the last 5 years. But I thought I'd go back to her original representation in Africa as an African Yoruban goddess, and acknowledge her watery beginnings and her fertility, and her mother. Her connection is our mother. Remember, that's what her name means. So in closing, you can close your eyes, you can sing along with me. I'll sing it a couple times, as I always do with my chants. And I always say that whenever we're chanting, it's a vocal meditation. And so the longer we chant, the more we have this opportunity to move from the mundane world into the magical world. We cross the limen, we cross the threshold. So here's the chant I want to share with you today. We all come, let's see, is this the one I wanted to do? Yeah. We all come from the mother, and to her we shall return like a drop of rain, flowing to the ocean We all come from the mother, and to her we shall return like a drop of rain flowing to the ocean. We all come from the mother, and to her we shall return like a drop of rain flowing to the ocean. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you in another week or two. Let me know how you connect with this energy, what your relationship is with your ancestors, and if that speaks to you, then definitely come join me next week on Wednesday the 19th, when I'll be doing my new moon circle in Scorpio, and we will be honoring our ancestors. We'll create our own little ancestor honoring altar, and which I've done several times already this season, and a ritual to honor our deceased loved ones. Thanks so much for being with me. Bye for now.